No, no, it's fine. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm N.L. Bishop. I serve as Senior Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine. It's good to see you all here. I'm looking out and seeing people I know from so many different places, friends and colleagues who I've worked with and known for many years. And we're just delighted that you're here. From so many communities, people who I've worked with and people from faith communities, fraternal organizations, and social services organizations. It's just great to see you all. I'm going to be calling up Dean Lee Learman, who's going to come and give us a welcome. It has been a real pleasure for me to be serving in this role and working very closely with him at this fine School of Medicine. Dean Learman came here in 2019 and has quickly immersed himself inside this region, not only here, but across this entire region. He's been doing some really great things inside this building, working with students and faculty here, producing medical students who are going to go out and serve wide and far. But not only that, the things that he's doing alongside that in the community. He's very engaged in so many ways, and I have such a deep appreciation for watching and listening and learning and watching his leadership and the things that he's doing here. This is a man that is fully engaged and fully committed to the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And with that, I would ask you to join me as we call him for a welcome to us.
Well, it is very hard to follow N.L. Bishop making any kind of introduction. And so I appreciate your very generous and kind words. I'm still a student of allyship and I'm doing my best. I'm learning every day. So thank you, N.L., for that wonderful introduction. And I just got to say that the person who brought us all here together today is none other than Ryan Bell. You'll hear from him in a minute. And it's been such a pleasure for me to work with Ryan since early 2021, I think it was, when he launched the Black Father Family Initiative and invited me to serve on the steering committee for that. I'm very grateful to have been asked, and it's been a real pleasure and honor to work with you. Through the strength of Ryan's leadership and with the support of partners at United Way of Roanoke Valley, the Black Father Family Initiative has grown in its scope, in its vision, in its strategy, and in its programming in a very short period of time during a pandemic. It's been wonderful to be part of it and to watch Ryan and his leadership. When he shared the thoughts about tonight's program with me, I was immediately excited by the opportunity that this created for the greater Roanoke community and for our VTC community to all learn together from this wonderful guest and panel that we have tonight. It is a great honor for us to serve as the title sponsor for tonight's event and host in our building a conversation between Dr. Reverend Bill Lee, founding chairman of New Horizons Healthcare, and Dr. Robert Wynn, director of the Massey Cancer Center at VCU in Richmond. Tonight, the attendees here in person, you all, and those who are viewing the live stream will learn a lot about health disparities that affect Black men, fathers, and families, and the impact of these disparities across multiple generations. So on behalf of the Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine and our faculty, staff, students, and residents who care deeply about achieving equity in healthcare, we are grateful for this opportunity to learn more from this important conversation. Thank you very much.
My name is Ryan Bell, and I'm the founder of Black Father Family. Society paints Black men as not being serious about the role of fatherhood, not cherishing the responsibility of fatherhood. I started Black Father Family to combat that narrative, to change that stereotype, to begin to push against that stigma. And so we moved away from this idea of trying to combat a narrative and have shifted into this space of really taking on what the true concept of Black fatherhood is. You can't be what you can't see. And oftentimes we are not provided the opportunity to see Black men enjoying their families and enjoying being dad. And so we take every opportunity that we can to expose and empower that image of a Black man enjoying the responsibility of fatherhood. United Way Roanoke Valley's mission is to lift 10,000 families to self-sustainability, right? And what better way to do that than through a father? And so the relationship between Black Father Family and United Way is one that is a perfect marriage of family stabilization with the role that fathers play within that family stabilization unit, right? Fathers are there emotionally, they need to be there economically, they need to be there educationally. They're there to advocate for their families and their communities that they live in. All of the things that the United Way is about. And so what better way to move the mission forward of the United Way and the mission of Black Father Family than doing it through the fathers that empower these families and these communities. For me, Black Father Family has become successful at the moment in the place and time where each father feels as though they are a better father to their children. They are a better father to their family. And whatever capacity that is for them at that particular point in time in their life, if they feel that they're able to be the individual who allows the opportunity for their family to move a little further along that journey to family stabilization, then Black Father Family has done what we needed to do. Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening. I first want to say thank you, and I appreciate everyone who is here today and everyone who has decided to come and join us for this very timely and important conversation. The reason why I wanted to play that video first is to sort of just set the context for what the conversation is going to be about and why we are gathered here today. And I want to take a few moments to sort of dive a little deeper to set that context for why we're here today and why we're so excited about the work of Black Father Family moving forward. So today we're here for a conversation. We're here for a conversation on generational health, a conversation on Black men and health disparities. And so recently, Black Father Family just completed a new strategic planning process where we outlined what is it that Black Father Family is aiming to do and how will we do it. And the key things in our new mission statement is Black Father Family Initiative creates a space for Black fathers to find meaningful connections, support, and resources. The key in this, and the key in the work that we're doing, and the key that I hope we take away from this conversation tonight is this idea of creating community. How do we create community around Black men? How do we create community around the institutions that serve Black men so that they can be in a better position, not only for themselves, but for the families and the communities in which they reside? And we do this for one particular reason. It's to promote the health and well-being and the success of the children, families, and communities that the fathers are a part of. So the work that we're doing with fathers is not merely just for the dads. It's not merely just for the fathers, but it's for the community as a whole. It's for the children that are in those families. It's for the units that surround those families. How do we position the fathers to be the most successful for themselves and for those around them? Now, the vision, unapologetically, Black Father Family is about the work of Black people. How do we position thriving Black children, thriving Black families, and thriving Black communities? That is the vision of Black Father Family. And we do that through the work of the Father. Now, why? Why do we do this? Why is this important? Why is this a vital piece of the puzzle? And the word is legacy. There's a quote I just recently heard where it says, legacy is not something that you leave for people, but rather something that you leave in people. That is what we're here to do with Black Father Family. We're here to position fathers to deposit pieces of legacy along their journey. And today we're going to have a beautiful conversation about the legacy of health and well-being. How are we positioning fathers to leave a legacy of health and well-being for their children, for their families, and for their community? So I promise I wouldn't be before you guys long. You guys are not here to hear me tonight, but I want to introduce to you guys the individuals who are going to be leading our conversation here tonight, and then we're going to jump right into our conversation. And so when this idea first came about and we were having the conversation about health and well-being and who would be the perfect individuals to take part in this conversation, there was nobody else that I could think of to moderate this particular conversation other than the Reverend Dr. William Lee. Reverend Dr. William Lee is the founding chair of New Horizons Healthcare. And I recently just watched an interview that he did where he told the story about how New Horizons, or the idea of New Horizons, came to be. Correct me if I'm wrong. But it was this idea, this concept. His father got sick. His father became ill. And his father did not have the insurance to take advantage of some of the things that he would have otherwise. And so New Horizons Healthcare is sitting here, in my eyes, in my estimation, yes, for community, yes, for family, yes, for children, but of a son's desire to assist and help his father. And that is the work of Black Father Family. Those are the seeds, those are the nuggets that we're depositing now. And so I couldn't think of anybody better than Reverend Dr. William Lee to come be a part of this conversation. He is the former pastor of Loudon Avenue Christian Church for 39 years. He is the founding chairman of New Horizons Healthcare, and is somebody who I value and cherish very much in my own personal walk. And so would you please help me and welcome me, Dr. Lee. And then we said, well, who can Dr. Lee have this conversation with? Who is somebody that we can bring in to have this conversation, who we'll be able to learn from, to glean from, to maybe deposit some nuggets of wisdom in us on this particular evening. And so I started scouring, I started looking at things, and I came across the Harrison Museum's lecture series, where there was a particular gentleman there who gave a talk, and he just kept it real and honest. And there was a level of vulnerability, a level of truth within that particular conversation. And so we decided that that's what was needed. We decided that truth, honesty, and determination is what was needed for this particular conversation tonight. And so we reached out to Dr. Robert A. Wynn. Dr. Robert A. Wynn is, what I'm learning very quickly, is a rock star in the space of healthcare, right? He is the current director of the VCU Massey Cancer Center, and is, at the particular time of his appointment, was the first and only Black to be a director of a National Cancer Institute designated cancer center. And so again, we're talking about legacy. One of the things that sold me on inviting Dr. William to come be a part of this conversation is I watched an interview that he did where he talked about this concept, and during our time here today, he's repeated this to me many times, about the idea of taking science to the community, about taking healthcare to the community, about allowing the community to inform the work that we do. And Black Father Family is in the position and positioning yourself to not tell individuals what they need and how it shows up, but how we working with them to inform the work that we're doing. And he is the epitome of that happening right now at the VCU Massey Center. And so we couldn't think of anybody else to bring here to have this conversation with Dr. Lee other than Dr. Wynn. So please join me in welcoming our special guest.
Well, Dr. Wynn, it's you and me. Tonight, you'll get a chance to do something that the old folk in the Black community would tell young people you're not supposed to do, and that's signify. But tonight, you'll get a chance to do some signifying. It'll be all right. You'll This should be a private conversation between two colleagues, but we thought y'all might want to hear what we had to talk about. So stick your nose and ears on in and we'll have a good time. Dr. Min, let me just get right at a piece. The literature that I review states that Black men suffer the worst health than any ethnic racial group in America. Why is it that Black men have that distinction?
So I'm glad you answered that. And before I get to that, I just want to be clear that the term health disparity is going to come up a couple times tonight. So before I jump into that, I want to explain to you what I mean by health disparities. When we talk about differences in health outcomes, you can talk about African-American women with breast cancer versus white women. African-American women have a worse health outcome. When we talk about equity, because many of us have now gotten into this hashtag equity conversation, but I'm gonna be straight up, equity is more of a dream and an aspiration. It is a principle that says that if we follow it, we should therefore be able to eradicate any sort of health outcomes. But let's talk about health disparities. For me, for real, health disparities is rooted in social justice in the following way. Prostate cancer. We know in the United States that there'll be more African-American men dying from prostate cancer than white. Hold on, except in the VA. What did we say? We talk sometimes about how in my brown skin, I am more predisposed to disease by my biology. Unfortunately, we're not taking into a context the structure. So disparities for me is the following. If you look at African-American and white men in a VA system, there is no difference in health outcome from prostate cancer. So stop talking to me about that because I'm brown and because I'm Black, therefore I am just more biologically predisposed without understanding the history, without understanding the stresses that go with that, without understanding, we're gonna get down to talking about not only the redlining, but the urban renewal project that ultimately build white roads through Black bedrooms and not only expose those neighborhoods to more toxins, but by the way, there was a double shot of putting in businesses that weren't always great with the air. So when I talk about the differences of African-American men, I am reminding people this is a complicated situation. And it's not just my DNA that you have to account for, it's also my ZNA. That is my zip code neighborhood of association. And so that's where we're actually taking the new science to. So I know it's a complicated answer, but I just wanted to make sure that disparities rooted for me is in the context of social justice, because if we were to provide the same things the VA does for everyone else, then that means we should be able to close the gap, not because of my biology, but because of the structure.
Well, since you just opened the door wide.
I know, Ryan was like, you gonna learn, like, look, man, this is where you don't get invited back.
Yeah. So why don't you just go and dig a little bit deeper with that so that
Yeah, so I had done a little bit of work and it has been the most fascinating thing since I've come here. Now I'm coming from Chi-Town, West Side, by the way. But you know, ain't got no hate for my South Side brothers and sisters. Just say West Side. That's the way we roll. When I've come to Virginia, well, I've recognized a couple of things. And I'll use Richmond as an example, but we can use Roanoke as well. In Richmond, there was an area called the Jackson Ward. It was considered the Harlem, right? Or the Black Wall Street in that area. Right. The funny part about that area is that it's interesting because when I look at redlining, and let's talk about redlining. Redlining was by Homer Hoyts, who is a Wisconsin graduate, also developed for the FDA in 1930s, the concept of redlining. Now, where did that come from? It came from the soft science, call it what it is, of eugenics. It turns out that there was this crazy thinking that to pay back your loans, there was this sort of thing, right? So we then had neighborhoods that were, some were desirable and some were not desirable. And the non-desirable ones didn't get loans. That was called redlining. But if you look at the redlining issue, I know people are starting to talk about redlining, but look, we had our own banks, had our own commerce. Many of these neighborhoods actually, despite the redlining, were like, okay, we good. But it was the issue of the 1950s and the 60s when we were talking about the urban renewal, AKA slum renewals, where we literally divided communities that were robust and active and cut them off. And many of these communities have never actually come back from that. So I've been reminding my basic science colleagues, my translational science colleagues, quit talking about me and my predisposition of prostate cancer. And why don't you add a little bit of the biology, in addition to the genome, why don't you add a little bit of that genome talk about the history and the structures that have created us to have lack of access to care, but also environmental issues that also increase these things. That, I think, is the new conversation for today.
Wow. So let's stay here for a minute. Historically, given the Tuskegee piece in later years, Henrietta Lacks, on and on and on and on. So let's talk about whether racism and all of that just impacts this downward spiral of health of black men in particular.
Oh, I love that question. You know what? So here's what happened during COVID. When COVID first began, and when we started putting together these tests and all the rest of the stuff, we started looking at African-American communities that says, I don't understand why they're not getting these tests. I don't understand why they're not getting the vaccine. I always sort of say that was well-meaning, but when you take that and not understand that my grandmother, who, by the way, is from Remlick, Virginia, actually would tell me not to go. I thought she was crazy. She would say, I don't want you going to no hospital after 10 o'clock. Don't be going around them hospitals at 10 o'clock. They're going to take you. And I'm like, man, she crazy. It turns out, though, that Dr. Utsi and others have been writing this whole story about how Black bodies were commercialized, grave robbing and all the rest of that stuff for the cadavers to actually do things on. So when I actually think about when I say to people and they say, well, they're a little suspect and suspicious, you'd be crazy not to be. However, facts do have to play a role. Now, look, I can't lie about your numbers. You can get the Dr. TikTok all you want to, but Dr. TikTok also told you that African Americans couldn't get COVID at the very beginning of COVID. And ultimately, it took us only a couple of weeks to be like, I think Dr. TikTok, you might be wrong on this one, right? So I think we are in a struggle now because we definitely have a reason to be rational. It would be irrational, I think, for most African Americans, including myself, not to be, at least at a moment, like, hold on now. But just because you are suspect and suspicious doesn't mean that goes into following blindly to what I call the abyss of stupidity, in the context of seeing right before your eyes that in 1971, 90% plus of the people with lung cancer died. Any women that actually had advanced breast cancer, that you didn't have anything to do with. Since 1971 to 2022, not only do I have my chemotherapies, but I got a whole list. Look, when I was a medical student, I used to have to learn to talk. Back in the early 90s, I'd be like, well, we have a chemotherapy. And they, doc, well, give me the truth. How does it work? I'd be like, well, have you gone to Disney World yet? In my lifetime, I've had a front row seat in seeing my patients go from giving them a drug that was called a cisplatin-based drug, a chemotherapy. Now I pull out, I'm like, hold on, wait a minute. I got an immunotherapy drug right here. Wait, hold on, wait a minute. I got a molecular talk. Wait a minute. I know now that when you come in, even with advanced stage, I got something for you. It still remains that if most Black men, we get checked early, you cut it out, it's done. But the truth of the matter is this whole context of fatalism that we have had for a while is some old news to me. And I understand the United States syphilis study of 1932 and all of this, I get it. I have it myself. I mean, even though I've learned how to wear a blue blazer, I'm from straight up the hood. So I mean, even when I get the other colleagues at the doctor, I'll be like, yeah, okay. But the reality is, if we don't have that trust, you'll get the double concussion. We'll get the concussion from the history of being paralyzed by not having the therapies. But the crazy part is, you also lose out again with our communities from not getting what I consider to be life-saving. In my lifetime can see it. I got women 15, 18 years, men 10 years out from what would have been an advanced something that they should not even be walking, not only just surviving, but thriving. So for me, this is a testament of And again, any wisdom I get comes from my father, my grandfather, John Donne, and all the rest of them. But one of the things I was talking to Brother Bell about a little earlier, I said, we are in a time that we are stuck in a almost a vacuum of pessimism and nihilism. And the crazy thing is, to me, it is an insult and it is disrespectful to the legacy of the people who've come before us, who set the stage so that we might actually have some optimism and some hope to move forward. And I'm going to tell you, science, independent of what people say, has definitely moved forward.
So how do you get this science into the neighborhoods, into the places where the science has not normally gotten?
Yeah, now, Dr. Lee, now I'm going to get radical up in here and say some things that I know I ain't
If
going
you
to get
get into
anybody
more,
back, but you know what I'm saying.
If you get into more radical, I'm heading for the door. So go ahead. We're signifying. Go ahead.
There you go. One of the ways is to be a little bit more thoughtful about exactly how do we get to communities. You don't get to communities by talking at them. And most health systems have talked at, not spoken with. In fact, W.B. Yeats once said, I learned this when I was at Notre Dame back as an undergrad, I think once said, think like the wisest of men and women, but speak in the language of the people. This disconnect that we feel between science is a relatively new sense of the not belonging to something because it means it's for those people, it's for those, or for part of that has been access. So if I were to actually have a magic wand, I would put much more money into our federally qualified health centers. I'd make sure that the federally qualified health centers are aligned and connected with health systems. And by the way, that our community, instead of getting a health system navigator, why can't we get somebody from the neighborhood? When I was talking in the Southwest side of Chicago, someone said to me once, Doc, I got all what you're saying. You a smart dude, man, but we just looking for somebody to hold up a flag and say, here's where you park. But that's that whole concept of economic. That the economics of having connectedness to health systems from the neighborhoods is important. That's one. Two, we're going to have to train people differently. And we just launched a national program. Man, I'm so proud about this. Clinical trials. So let me just quickly, when I say, I already see some people talking about, I was listening up until they talk about some clinical trials, but hold on now. If you're a cancer patient and you've reached the end of the road with your standard of care, there ain't no other standard of care. But in oncology, what we do is we ultimately sort of figure out there's a new drug X. Could it work? If it does work, then obviously it's going to take care of you right then and there. If it doesn't work, then ultimately we have given you not only standard of care plus. Turns out that most of it, not my data, you can look it up. Most people in clinical trials, particularly African Americans on clinical trials, tend to do better when they're on a clinical trial than when they're just getting routine standard of care. Not my data. Not my data. Why? Because you get an extra eyes. So we need to actually start thinking about how to embrace the future that is here. In fact, I say the future is here. It's just unevenly distributed. Our job is to, getting back to your question, how do we realign those access to the most cutting edge therapies that I know work, but how do we get them into African? I'll stop with this. We know right now that we have more people in the United States right now, and probably my grandfather, guy from Alabama, Colin, Alabama, said, when you're going to talk about something, talk about somebody else. Don't talk about them in their home now. So we ain't going to talk nothing about Roanoke. Not tonight. Not from me. It's not from me. So it turns out that when you start looking at, just let's take lung cancer. So 1 in 2 men will die from cancer. 1 in 3 women will die from cancer. It turns out that cancer, not cardiovascular disease, is the #1 killer of people in Virginia. Most of y'all didn't know that. Most of y'all also didn't know that when it comes to lung cancer, the people who die most from lung cancer, African-American men. The people who die mostly from pancreatic cancer, African-American men. We can go on the list, but we won't. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because we know right now that if I had a African-American man come to me with lung cancer, the vast majority are not even biomarker tested. You'll still have doctors right now that says you have advanced stage, ain't nothing we can do for you. Now, I started off the conversation sort of saying, I got a whole toolkit now. Now, if you could get what's called genetic testing, I might say, oh, you have a biomarker. Wait a minute, I got 3, 4 drugs for that. Most of us are still practicing 20th century medicine, even though we are living in the 21st century. So if I had a magic wand, I would make sure that those things are available, that we are definitely aligning more with federally qualified health centers. And I think, Dr. Lee, you know, I mean, I'm back in the day, FQHC kind of guy. And so I think that doing that, and by the way, getting more communication that's out in the community about what we're doing and more transparency could certainly help. And last, I know it may not be popular, but you can't convince me that the lack of training and the lack of pathways for African-American men and others from our communities into these fields of science, that's a negative, not a positive. So we need to figure out ways of how to make, look, I love hip hop, you know, and some of y'all may know that, well, maybe none of y'all know because I'm wearing the blue blazer real tight. But before I was wearing the blue blazer, I used to do things like produce some things for people like Mos Def, although people like Ryan Bell, well, you a little too young to know who Mos Def is. You know, may not even know who Black Thoughts from the Roots are. But back in the day, and so I was actually activated and motivated of understanding that my love for science and my love for these things in part was just my passion of creativity. And in fact, it was my grandfather who said, he goes, now, you know, when you go to college, you ain't learning nothing new. You just learning how to put tags on it and naming it. That's all you learning. And so for me, I think it's been a wonderful example of how we already have these infrastructures in place. We just need to align them better.
Well, so you have started on my question number 6. So because it's the literature states that Black men and Black persons in general do better with their health if they have a provider who looks like them. The issue is only 4% of the people who wear the white coats look like us. So you've already just scratched it. Let's go a little bit deeper, because you're saying that there is creative genius that we're not tapping that'll get our young people, they can do chemistry, they can do biology, they can do math if we find out a different way to teach them. So help us get a room full of young Black people ready to become our providers in the next 20 years?
I'll start off by saying the following. I'll definitely love a beat, but if loving science is wrong, I don't want to be right. I will tell you that the love for science has been the following for me, that when we think about science, we tend to think of it as the other. We don't recognize that we have a very long history from Charles Drew and many other people, Vivian Green, who have been in the forefront, and many people's names you don't even know, who've created the new miracle drugs that we actually have. You know, the sister that actually came up with the mRNA vaccine is from North Carolina.
Right.
And so when I talk about things belonging, the reality is we have seen, I think, sadly, since the 80s, an erosion of some of these federal programs that, to be quite honest with you, were working. I'm going to be honest with you that I am a walking poster child for many of these federal governments. I was born to a teenage mom. I'm a proud Head Start kid. Everywhere I go, I ain't ashamed. I'm a proud Head Start kid. I had programs that then allowed me to actually get my first glimpse into research at places like Roswell Park and other places in Cornell up in New York. I wound up having my first Minority Supplement Award from the National Institute of Health that allowed me, again, to break down this sort of false barrier of us sort of saying, well, science, that ain't for me. The reality is, if you think about creativity, it's the one place where you just get to create and think. I used to tell somebody that, you know, it's cool making some tracks and all the rest of that stuff, but you can actually have a whole entire career. You don't have to always run the lab. You can assist with running the lab and still be making 6 figures by just thinking, how could I do good? I think I heard Russell Simmons once say, he actually said to somebody, don't just do a job. What's the problem you want to solve? So if the problem we want to solve in my neighborhood happens to do with how do we treat cancer better? How do I take care of my grandmama and my granddad and their hypertension? How you going to solve that question? It ain't going to be just from thinking about it. You need to jump up in there. And so I think what we need to do is get back to what was working, by the way. Many of the programs that were put into place in the latter part of the 60s and the 70s, we saw a flourishing of programs and a flourishing of numbers of African-American doctors and things like that and scientists. I think we have to get back on this thing that, the reality is we have to go back and figure out what are those pathways. And those pathways shouldn't just be from, the people who have access to everything, but a kid like me who didn't have access to everything. In fact, somebody said, well, you must have been reading books since you were small. The first book I read was on my own for fun, was after I got out of college. Because I was like, people read books for fun. Oh, check that out. Okay. So I do think as a culture, getting us back to reading, getting us back to talking with one another and getting more exposure, because the crazy thing is, I don't think anybody knew that in 2019, when I accepted this job, I was the only African-American cancer center director. Now, what's an NCI designated cancer center? So I'm gonna just talk about that real quick. There's 6,000 cancer centers over the United States, but only 71 have been deputized by the federal government as being the centers of excellence. So you have 2 in Virginia. So I heard somebody once say, well, if I get sick, I'm just gonna throw it up my hands to the Lord. And I said, well, that's one way of doing it. But you have 2 centers that have been designated by the federal government as being the best of. And by the way, even when you walk into my Massey, you're walking into 70 other cancer centers around the country. I called the people from Harvard, Dr. Glimsher, hey, give me a hand with this. And so what I think it is that we have an oasis, but we have been so fragmented. And we have been so decentralized in our educational process within bringing our communities together. We used to just talk about this stuff in my barbershop. I had a Mr. Woods who would say, now look, what you doing for? They used to talk about these pathway programs in the barbershop. Many of those things have gone away. And so I think additional federal support for some of those things, but local awareness of those things is what we're gonna have to get back to.
So look, I've got 3 questions, and then we'll have some opportunity to let the audience to throw some stuff at us. One question in particular, again, the literature says this, that Black men have this thing called Black masculinity. That even when Black males have the best insurance going, they are not likely to see a provider for years. What is this Black masculinity that will cause us to have an early grave as opposed to take care of ourselves, empower ourselves? We have systems that are hurting us, but we're hurting ourselves also.
Yeah, I said to someone back in the day when Mike Tyson was at his best, would you just walk up in the ring and just fight that guy? But that's what we do every day by not getting us a fighting chance to having our prostate exams because we worried about, the funniest part, people say, well, I'm worried about your finger. Man, you got a whole lot of things to worry about than somebody's finger, man. Come on now. That's going to be your test of that's why you're not going to go. Or the other thing is, someone says to me, well, what if they tell me bad news? Right. And so I told one brother once that I said, if they tell you bad news, here's the difference between telling you bad news early and telling you bad news late, is that when they tell you bad news and it's early, I can fix that. And you can have maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 more years to just do your business. But when you come in and every piece of your organ is actually now gone because you just decided to rough it up and tough it up. This soul thing about keeping quiet and not talking. You know what the funny part about most of us African-American men, this is what I have now at Thanksgiving, once a year now, have made all the men in my family and women, we talk about our health because I said, what's killing African-Americans is family secrets. Yeah. About our health. Now they would talk about cousin some had, and we had breast cancer, but we can't talk about no breast cancer now. Now look, the breast cancer and the prostate cancer might be actually applicable to me because it may be genetic. So I think that we are going to have to adopt much more of it doesn't say anything about your masculinity to actually illustrate something about our intelligence. The intelligent man says, wait a minute, if I got a little spot and I can take care of that and I got 50 more years, right? But trying to actually just tough through it doesn't even make sense anymore. And so what I'm hoping to do is to start these crucial conversations of what you all are doing here in Roanoke, which I really appreciate. How do we just have more freedom to find courage? Now, I'll end with this. Most dudes can show physical courage, but the courage that is actually the most and the strongest is the spiritual and intestinal fortitude to make yourself vulnerable. There is not a courageous act. I'll put money on the table, not like we bet because we ain't gonna do that, but I will say the following. You can't name a courageous act, not one, without having somebody be vulnerable. If the baby carriage that's going down the hill that you then suddenly jump out and you see a car that's coming and you jump out and you try to push the baby carriage out, by definition, necessarily means that you have made yourself now vulnerable and you've put yourself at risk. And so most of the men, particularly African-American men that I meet these days, you know, even the ones that got the popcorn muscle, I go, man, look, you ain't all that tough. Did you go get your digital rectal exam? Yeah. Then nah, I didn't get that. Well, you ain't all that tough. Right. So don't try to be coming up trying to front like that. You clearly ain't all that tough. So I think we have to reframe what it is that we think about toughness. And toughness, the physical toughness is one aspect of toughness, but the real toughness comes from doing those things that you make yourself vulnerable and find the courage within that. And that spiritual courage, that intestinal fortitude to do those right things, not only just for you, but your family and everybody else. And that's real courage. And I think that message we should get out more.
Two other questions. You and I have connected on this down for at least last 3 years. During COVID, you along with Reverend Todd Gray at Fifth Street Baptist Church and others had what was called Faith and Facts Friday. And you were trying to help the Black community to see, you were bringing science into faith and saying the two of you can work together. What I'd like to talk to the audience about is the connection of faith and science, but especially how the Black church can be what I call in my work a portal of healthcare. I think it's a key place where Black people, especially Black men, may indeed find an intro into the health world.
No, I agree. And, you know, I've on some Sundays told somebody, now look, y'all act like, you know, Black folk, when we don't do no science. I go, well, you read the Bible? Yeah, I read the Bible. I read my Bible every day. I go, you read the thing in Daniel? Yeah, I go, you know where your Daniel diet comes from? You know what the Daniel diet was science. It was, how do we go back to ultimately figure out? So I said, don't be playing with me with all this yik-yakety stuff that you don't know science. The first thing is, for me, Martin Luther King, I think, said it best, sort of said the 4 pillars. When you came to the pillars of the African-American community, you had the press, you had the fraternities, but top number 1 was the church. And in fact, y'all remember back to early 2020, right? Where COVID was coming out. Who'd you believe? Sometimes the information coming out right from our own CDC was mixed. So people weren't believing scientists. They certainly weren't believing doctors. And by the time where I actually had to come up with, when we were talking about the vaccine, people like, you trying to give us and kill us all? I was like, all right, now look. So it turned out that it was a moment of clarity that if we were going to get the voices out, we need to get the voices to the most trusted. And so we had real crucial conversations in the beginning about COVID. And in towards the end of May 2020, we launched the Facts and Faith Friday because we thought that facts are not at war with your faith. No need for facts and faith to be at war. And in fact, it was the central part of that got multiple Black churches together that then said, not only how do we disseminate information to our congregation, but what I loved about these men and women from these faith-based leaders is that they were committed to the community. So it wasn't enough just to say, we got to get this information out to our, the people who come out to church, but how do I get the information out to our communities? And in fact, they were probably some of the best carriers. And in fact, I have to laugh because some of them would say, well, why do you join? And they would say, look, how often do you get someone from the CDC? You know who we got? Kristen Marie Singleton, African-American woman who actually stayed even during an administration because she said she ain't gonna let nobody run her away. And the best part is she got on the Zoom. I was like, you know, you work for the CDC. You can't say this. I go, she got up on. She goes, well, first of all, I want y'all pastors and everyone to know there ain't nobody going to run me away from what I work so hard for. And she goes, I'll always tell you the truth, even if it means my job. That's what I'm here to do. And so imagine now having cutting edge information, not from somebody who knew cousin Ronnie, who heard it on, Google, but someone right from the CDC, that you can even ask the question, how y'all, the best question she ever got answered was, why y'all look confused? And she said, because we are. And again, so just so y'all know, we don't record any of this. So, I had to, she go, you record. I go, I ain't recording nothing. No. This is in the moment. But having that real transparent conversation and having it actually, so people said, so what? You had these conversations. You can look at every one of those parishioners and those faith-based leaders that was part of Facts Faith. Their churches wound up with probably fewer people getting COVID. In fact, I credit them with saving thousands and thousands of lives. They're like, Dr. Wynn, you did. I'm like, no. Faith-based leaders who had these conversations saved thousands and thousands of lives. And in fact, are now part of the solution of how we get back to churches. But if you look at most of those churches, the uptick in vaccines and all these other things was directly related to that Facts Faith Friday and those faith-based leaders. So I have nothing but mad respect for the Black church.
Well, thank you. Since we are sitting in this marvelous building, it's a medical school. I just thought I would throw this out. What you just said says to me that there needs to be an intentionality between medicine and especially the Black church. So tell me, help us find out a way that before there's a crisis, before there's an epidemic, are there educational pieces, are there lectures, are there seminars that we could be ongoing so that when the trouble comes, we already have built a trust base?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I'm gonna steal this one from my auntie. She used to say to people, you know what, you need to connect with me before there's a crisis. And so I think in that vein, having programs that actually have health systems, not when you're in a crisis, but having regular cadence of communications and openness is important. This Facts, Faith, and Friday turns out that it's one of the few programs that even as we're getting through COVID, many of the other ones have died down. We now are talking about issues on mental behavioral health, particularly within the Black community, which again is a taboo subject because apparently some of us feel like everybody else except for Black people get depressed. I wish that were true. It is so not true. And so we are starting to have these issues around policing and all the rest of this other conversations. And so we've opened up what was initially a weekly conversation around COVID to now talking about screening for cancer. We're talking about other issues about housing. We're talking about transportation issues. But the point for me was that it's now become a venue that everyone looks towards because it's now a cohort of people that get together and conversate, as opposed to there is now something happening in the African-American community where you see a crisis and all of a sudden I want to step in. So to your point, I do think my aunt was right. If you want to really connect with me before there's a crisis. And I think we have to have more of these touch points about conversations.
My last question, and because you have said it over and over again, and during dinner, I rediscovered that you cut your medical teeth in a federal qualified health center in Chicago.
That's right.
So talk to us a little bit about how you see FUHCs helping us with these health disparities and making a better health pathway, not just for Black people in this case, but for people who are poor, the socioeconomic folk at the low end of the spectrum.
You know what? I think of the history of community health centers, starting all the way from 1942 with Dr. Clark. I think of Dr. Hatch, who's from Mississippi, and Dr. Geiger setting up something here in the United States that was literally meant to be the undergirding. The war on poverty, part of that was to actually, back in the day, remember, they would write scripts for food. Right. I learned that. And so as we start thinking about things like Federally Qualified Health Center, we have the undergirding infrastructures to really work with. And I actually think that the next level is how do we bring more? How do we bring more resources? And I was just telling you a little bit earlier that when I was at an FQHC, I did one thing. I was trying to bring science more to the FQHC. So on the south side of Chicago, this is where Bernie Mac comes from, D Rose. I mean, Inglewood is Inglewood, right? I had a town meeting like this on the 16th Ward, and one of the aldermen brought us there. And I had a group of guys, well-meaning. So don't take this like I'm slamming my people, because they were my people. I bought them. 3 of my top scientists, because they said, I want to go. And I said, well, you sure you want to go up in the 16th Ward? They said, I want to go. They started talking science talk. So you can see most of the people in the audience were nodding their head. They didn't understand what's going on, but they were like, yeah, okay. They were giving them that quiet nod. But oh my goodness. One of them actually did something that I was telling you that it was almost like a movie that if I could go back, I could be like, no. My man stepped up there and said, well, we know you all are scientifically literate. Oh my God. This 87-year-old woman stood and talked to somebody else, right? She came up and she went shuffled to the mic and she said, now what did he say again? She said, well, we might be scientifically literate, but you illiterate too. That was a lesson for all of us at that moment, that there is stuff to be learned in the community. There is stuff within the FQHCs that can be taught so that we can inform what we believe are the places that have all the information. They don't. This is where we talk about bench to bedside. So this is whole 1950 miles that I come up things in my laboratory, then I get it to my bedside, and then we do clinical trials on you, and then we make you better. Well, I got something. How about people to a pipette or a community to bench, where we're informing the scientist on how to refine their scientific question? That's what we're trying to do now.
Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you.
Thank you.
We have 2 mics up here in the front. If anybody has questions, just come approach the mic and ask your questions. Ask away.
And thank you all for putting up with me tonight. I appreciate y'all.
And Ryan, just for logistics, we stop at 8:30.
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure folks don't give a dissertation with their questions. so you got to hit them hard. Let's go.
Say.
Yeah, you shouldn't have said that. I'm an alpha man. We tend to be very long-winded, so excuse me. You said we was in church, so we're gonna tell the truth and shame the devil. Peace and blessings. My name is Rob YB Youngblood. I serve as the chief connecting officer of YB Connects, and proud to be a partial sponsor of this event. As a connector, you talked about the importance of organizations and churches getting together. What could I do as a connector? What can connectors do to be able to bring these organizations together, the fraternities, to be able to deliver these messages out so that we can educate more people in a rapid fashion?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll keep it brief by sort of saying that I think right now is the age of knowledge. We say it's the age of technology. It's the age of all social media, but I'm surprised at how little people still know. The reality is, while we have high tech, I think to your point, in the context of connected, we're going to still require high touch. And so from my perspective, you're connecting, again, pieces of what we're doing tonight. If you want to know one of the baddest people in the United States right now doing genetic medicine, his name would be John Carlton, a brother from Crenshaw. I mean, his brother, not Crenshaw. I mean, his brother's from Crenshaw. And he actually has been doing wonderful work. We have now created, believe it or not, over the last 30, 40 years, a number of amazingly talented people that the issue is we just don't know how to dial in. So the connecting would be, how do we continue this conversation and not make this a one and done? And just quickly, by the way, one of the things we've done this in for young people is, I don't know if y'all, I mean, some of y'all probably know Common, and some of y'all probably heard of what's his name, Kanye West 1.0. I'm talking. You know, 1.0. I mean, I'm just letting y'all know for the record up in here, okay? So there was a producer for him that laid down the tracks, a young brother named Timbuktu. Some of you may know him. So he died of renal cell carcinoma and I think in his late 20s. His name is Timothy Francis Jones. Going to Connection. So they reached out to me and said, what can we do to bring about more information so that young men, African-American men and young people get a better grip on the reality is that they don't have to suffer. I tell Timothy Francis Jones Timbuktu story because at the same time, the head of what's called the Precision Medicine Initiative, of which I was a part of back in 2015 when Obama was there, was saved by precision medicine. A young white man at the time because he had access to the cutting edge science that came about from what we were doing. And so much so that he was then able to lead the program at the NIH. I tell you the story because once a year we get together and we have everybody from Ghostface to Red Alert to all my folk up out west, and you have all the hip hop house artists. They literally get together for free. They fly in just to do a whole show to raise money, but more importantly, to start raising awareness to young people that it's actually okay to talk about the fact that 1 in 2 men will die from cancer, 1 in 3 women will die from cancer. And when you start looking at the African-American community, that 1 in 2 is number 1 leading. So through music and through other activities, we're now trying different angles because a brother may not actually want to hear it. Oh man, I ain't gonna have no cancer. Well, it turns out that young folk with leukemias, lymphomas, the funny part about cancer just don't seem to care. You can be Republican, Democrat. You could be like, oh, I'm down with Woo 24 ways. You could be whatever. Cancer does not care. And so when it happens, we want to be there to sort of say, we understood. We understand because culturally, as African-American men, we are not wired for some reason, at least it's the myth that they tell us, we're not wired for health. But that's actually not true. We just have to actually be essentially exercise that muscle. And that's what I think you guys are doing really well here in Roanoke that I want to pattern after with your program, with Ryan, what you guys are doing, and Dr. Lee, what you guys are doing with your FQHCs and other things. You guys are laying the stage for how we can do things differently. And we're going to need connectors.
Dr. Wynn, Dr. Lee, I appreciate this conversation. Dr. Bell, Ryan, thank you for this opportunity to be here. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm a local licensed clinical social worker who've created these mental health initiatives to kind of do the same thing that you're able to do and spread this word. And our mission statement through our company is making healing possible. But my question is how can we do a better job of merging the worlds of healthcare, physical healthcare, and mental health? Because what we see is, like we were talking about, with this sense of Black masculinity, that's a mental health barrier, right? The thoughts of where did that come from? Why do you feel that way? Why do you think that way? So that drives home some of these mental health issues that a lot of our Black men aren't dealing with, which in turn makes them not want to go to seek help. And then the last part of that question with merging them, because most of the time it appears in my journey walking through the mental health world, is that as mental health workers, we're seen lower on the totem pole than physical health workers, right? So how can we, be on the same level in order to push this thing forward to be able to help, this holistic kind of view for, Black men and individuals?
Now, I appreciate that question for real, for real. So let me start off by saying something that my grandmother, I thought was a quote until I did the work. I found out it was from Theodore Roosevelt. But it still works for me. She would always tell me, people don't care how much you know until they know that you care. I don't think our health system, just being fair, has always talked about how much we care. We've been about the business of telling you how great we are, how we're coming up with the next cure, how we're coming up with how we are the most wonderful and our scientists are the most dominant in the world, so much so that that language has disconnected us, going back to your original question, from knowing that the health systems are really built on a foundation of having people know that they care. Part of this is going to know that they care, which is going to tie back into the second. I'm going to keep this short. It's clear that you can clearly have a physical body, that is well. But we've seen mental health in front of us and what it does. Now, for some of us, we saw when, Mike wasn't well, Mike Tyson wasn't well. We've seen Dennis Rodman. Now, this again, taboo subjects. We don't talk, we be like, don't be talking about that around this, you know what I'm saying? We understand that just because you're physically healthy, we understand the impact of the mental issues. And so COVID, if it hasn't done anything else, COVID's brought that to light that you need both mental, physical, and I'm gonna throw in another one, spiritual health. And so I think we are now much more aware than we would have been in 2018 and 2017 when you blow that off. And what you're gonna hear is a lot more conversations around the interplay between that mental health and the physical health. And so thank you for bringing that message up. But again, I think my grandmother was right. The system, people say, well, why don't more Black folks trust the system? Because it's not obvious that the system actually cares. This is where communication and language is actually going to play a critical role as much as the next molecular or innovative drug. The next phase of the 21st century of how we're going to turn this ship around is thinking about the science of communication and actually understanding the humility and grace, as my grandma would say, is that we're here to do a job to serve.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Nguyen and Dr. Lee. Appreciate it. You letting us be in on your conversation. My name is Linda Manns. I'm a retired registered nurse from the VA Medical Center here in Salem, Virginia. I've been on webinars with you, and I always said if I got the opportunity to be in the room with you, I need to ask you some questions. And I realize this is for the men, and all the things I had to ask about the men, you've already answered them about the disparity, the reluctancy, why they don't go and get their prostate exam and everything. But I need to ask you something about the women, because you are at the Massey Center in Richmond, one of the head areas that we can, get services from. My job is encouraging women, particularly young women, any women, early detection is what you need to do. I know you talked about clinical trials, and I know there are different, science has come a long way. When I first started back in the 70s, working on a cancer unit, people just died. They just came, they slept, they died. We didn't even give them pain medication because we felt that they were going to get addicted to it. So science is not where it was 40 years ago. But there are things coming up. I'm recognizing now a lot of our African-American women, and just not African-American women, the diagnosis they get is triple negative cancer, and there's not a targeted therapy for that treatment. Are there any trials being done in that area? And how are we looking as far as helping our African-American women?
So thank you for that. I'm gonna say it this way. My grandmother, and she's all in 96, but she's sharp as all get out. She had the song she used to say when she around the kitchen, look how far we come.
Yeah.
Brought us out of darkness into the marvelous light. Look how far we've come. The reality is I've had a front row seat of understanding how far we've come, certainly in science. Triple negative breast cancer, turns out, I'm gonna hit y'all with something else, and I'm gonna leave this alone because trials are underway, but let me hit you with this. Turns out that we go around talking about Black. That's what we say, about Black folk. Now look here, Lisa Newman from New York has shown that what we're not talking about though is ancestry. And I'm gonna hit this up in 2 seconds. 2 seconds, I swear. But look here, it turns out that if you are in Roanoke right now, and I'm taking this audience, and you come in Black, but it turns out you have triple negative breast cancer. Now hold on with this one. And it turns out your ancestry says that you are more of East African descent. You're gonna have a better outcome than your triple negative breast cancer. What do you say? Now hold on now. It gets even deeper. If you're a man with prostate cancer, it turns out, hold on, that just being Black ain't enough. If you're a Black person, male, with more what we would call Western ancestry, you will have a worse outcome of your prostate cancer. So when I talked about zip code neighborhood of association, I wasn't playing. It's about place and space. And what we're not doing is the real PSA, right? In the context of not only access and service, not only, this precision medicine and service, but ancestry. How many people, as we are actually taking care of you, we talk about the promise of precision medicine, but it's hashtag. The real issue is what we're going to be trying to do at Massey is not only understanding your blackness or understanding your whiteness, because it turns out that if you're from Eastern Europe, as opposed to some parts of Western Europe, the same thing applies. So let's stop playing. Science should be moving us forward. And the science just sort of said that Black is just the start. We need to actually start using the tools we have, because I now have had several women that I've actually referred back up to my friend, Dr. Lisa Newman, who were of Eastern African descent. I said, run the ancestral pattern. She ran the ancestral pattern. It turns out that they were more East African than West African. And guess what? We started tailoring our therapies and having better outcomes. So I just want y'all to be awakened to the fact that when we say Black, there's a whole lot that goes into that. Not all of us come from Ghana. There were different parts of the diaspora that we arrived here from with certain connections back to that diaspora, if you like it or not. Now, people talk about DNA. Let me just hold on with you now, that some of the diseases you got have been imprinted in your DNA from several generations of stress before. Now, that used to be something my grandmother used to talk about. I swear to God, I wish my grandmother here, because she said, this boy, he done learned everything he know from me. I swear to God, she used to walk around the house, say something I thought was crazy. She go, now, you know, so-and-so got that disease because, you know, her great-grandmother had. You be like, how that's going to do with? And it turns out that the reason why folks like Serena Williams and Beyonce, who have all the money in the world, have the difficult pregnancy, wasn't simply because of their Blackness, but it was because of the ancestral DNA imprinting from those stresses in those genes. So what I'm saying to you, why do I love science? Because science shouldn't alienate us. It should bring us closer to our Creator. And if from my perspective, the science is bringing me closer to the greatness of how things have been put together. And it's our job to understand that so we can better help, whether you're from rural Beattyville, Kentucky, or Danville, or Roanoke, or the east side of Richmond. I'm just saying. But there is this wonderful thing that's actually happening now, that we're going to be pushing our health systems and providers into understanding how does our ancestral markers, not my Blackness, but the ancestral markers play, and not just for Black people, it's for all. That's real precision medicine, and that's where we're heading. I'm sorry to get all hyped up about that. All right. I'm sorry to get hyped up about that, but
as a white woman who would like to be considered an ally of health disparities, what the most impactful
I love that. I love that. Again, going back to my family, grace and humility. What happens is sometimes we are coming up with answers before we actually have it from the person we just asked. I've been in a number of rooms, by the way, where someone just assumed I was an expert on something. I was like, I don't know that. And so what we're doing now, having open and honest conversations, is the first step to healing even our country. When I talk about being gripped by that nihilism and gripped by the pessimism, you can't have a conversation with someone that you don't know, that you can then build up trust with your neighbor and then have more difficult conversations. If I want to come in and actually talk about something really hard and I don't know you, you know, I got my West Side Chi-Town. I'll be like, I ain't talking, who sent you? Because I ain't talking to nobody who ain't sent you. I think that we are at a wonderful world of having a little bit of humility, of understanding how do we build, and I think we talked about it earlier, relationships. I'm now able to have conversations, I swear to God, with you, with people who were COVID deniers. One of my chemotherapy told me that I was just trying to get them in poison. I won't say where they're from, but I will say that they had a Confederate flag. But unfortunately, I did some country. So, he was able to talk about, a couple country folk, Charlie Pride, and went back to Earl Flat and Scruggs. And then all of a sudden we had a different conversation that led to him saying, well, you look like you okay. That conversation of you look like you're okay was better than the medicine I gave. Yeah. So when we talk about what can we do, let's start having the grace and humility to do the simple things, not solve the problem. Let's start building the relationships, because that to me is our best hope for us. So, but appreciate that question too. And let's keep this. Hopefully when this happens, y'all, I know y'all gonna keep the talk. Now I'm inspired. So I'm gonna do something like this up in Richmond. I'm gonna get everybody talking. But this talking now is probably more important now than ever before if we are going to save ourselves. And by the way, when people talk about, well, it ain't me, we got a term called body image agnosia. So I'm gonna show you what that looks like. If this is your hand, but you don't see that it's your hand, you like, what the hell is that hand doing in front of me? He's all up everywhere I go, this hand's coming. I'm like, but that's your hand. This ain't my hand. It's attached to your body. This thing ain't attached. That's body image agnosia. So when we start talking about problems in our community and we say, well, that's not my problem, hold on. I'm just saying, I'm gonna leave it there. We are all in this together. And if COVID didn't show us anything, it showed us that no matter where you were, it's going to touch you. Remember that one in South Carolina? We had a whole bunch of rich folk run up to Bald Head, South Carolina. Y'all hear this story? So they took off. They went to Bald Head, South Carolina. A bunch of rich people say, well, we're going to go and escape. Now, who was watering the grass and bringing the food? So it turned out that the whole Bald Head, South Carolina island, all 90% infected rate, they're like, how we get up? Like, come on now. Let's not pretend that we are not all in this together. And when there is something sick within our community, we are all dealing with that issue. So I think having the humility and the awareness that it's all problem, literally, is actually going to hopefully be something that we can move ahead with and be successful. And I know I've taken up too much time, but I apologize, but thank you so much. Thank you.
First, I want to say thank you, Dr. Wynn. Thank you, Dr. Lee, so much. Can we give him one more round of applause? And last, I would like to recognize a few people and organizations that made this event possible. First, I would like to recognize Mr. Robert Youngblood and YB Connects HBCU Alumni Relations as one of our sponsors. I'd like to recognize the new incoming CEO, he's in the position now, CEO John Stewart of New Horizons Healthcare as one of our sponsors here tonight. I also would like to recognize an organization that is near and dear to my heart, and President Kendall Peak of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated as another one of our sponsors tonight. I believe he is here. Back in the next. Of course, to our title sponsor, to Dean Learman, thank you so much for making this possible. To the Virginia Tech Korean School of Medicine for being such gracious hosts, not only of this event, but all of the events that have happened here this afternoon. Thank you so much. And this couldn't have happened without you, so thank you. And last but certainly not least, thank you to each of you for coming out here and joining us here this afternoon to have this conversation. There's a few things I hope you take away from this. The last piece of what Dr. Wynn shared, it's about relationships, and we're all in this together. This work can't get done without everybody here in this room finding out where they fit in, how they fit in, having the conversations, and being willing to offer some grace and humility. And the last thing I'll share with you, to each and every Black man in here who loves and enjoys being a father, thank you. I love you, and continue to keep doing what you're doing, and be on the lookout for some great things coming from Black Father Family in the future. Thank you. Yeah, Black good. It turned out good.